Hey, chicken nuggets. So now we're on to the phase of painting the motor on our 86 Tri Z250 3-wheeler build. So we're going to give you a little bit of the tips and tricks that we do, the ins and outs of painting the motors, and it'll work for any dirt bike, 4-wheeler, 3-wheeler, and so on, jet skis and so on. It'll work for anything. We're just going to show you what we do and give you a couple ideas of what we got going on here. And here we have our motor ready for paint. So what we do is we leave the spark plug in, we pull the radiator hoses off, any water coolant hoses, and we tape them over. We left the intake on while we sandblasted it, and we pulled the intake off just for the paint job. This way you can plug up the intake with a rag and then tape it. And same thing for the exhaust port. Stick a rag inside. Sometimes we put grease on the inside and then we tape it over and over. So we overlap the tape around the expansion chamber area, and then once we have it all pushed back, so we overlap it, push it back, then we wrap tape around the outside really tight. And that keeps anything from going in there. And then if it gets past the tape, usually it'll get stuck in the grease, and then it won't get past that rag. So you just don't want any sand getting into your motor, and this is going to be the two areas, the exhaust port and the intake port, where you can get them in. Everything else, we leave the covers on, and obviously we sandblast around everything. Obviously we make sure that we don't need any aluminum repair, welds, you know, something bottom of the cases. We look over well, and we would have to take this engine apart and fix it properly if it did have any damage like that, but it clearly doesn't. So once it's run through the sandblaster, like I said, we pull our intake off so we can get some paint on here. We just tape up all our wiring and so on. We keep this engine together so there's no oil or issues with anything leaking on it, and it'll give us a nice surface for any kind of paint. What we are using today is the VHT engine gloss black high temp enamel. You can use any kind. Here is the can we are using. It is SP 124 gloss black. Obviously you're going to shake up your can as well as you can, and you know, for about 2 minutes or so until the ball stops rattling. Until the ball stops rattling, boys. Just shake it till it doesn't make any more noise. Dummies. Anyway, once we have it to this point, we hang it in our powder coat booth, and we have our fans in the background that suck the fumes out, and then we just put on a few coats. So let's get at it. So we're going to leave our fans off in the background just so you can hear us a little bit better, and when you are done shaking your can, you are ready to start applying it. So we sandblasted our motor, we blew it all off with the air hose, we went in every crack and crevice and got the sand out of it, and then we wiped it down with acetone, leaving the engine with the sandblasted areas very good for a nice surface for the paint to stick to. So when you're done shaking your can, what we do is we test, obviously spray a little bit, because when you start spraying the can initially, now I know a lot of you guys don't necessarily need to be told how to use spray paint, but there are some of you that do, so just bear with me, guys. When you shake a can, you get it going, don't point it at the motor and start spraying. It is not ready to spray yet. You have to 2 or 3 seconds worth spray down at the area, down on the ground, or wherever you're spraying, until you see the color of your paint, whatever it's, obviously this is black, you can see it, the mist will turn to black. You're clearing out the line in the can, and you don't want to be spraying that onto your motor to begin with. I know a lot of you guys knew that, but some of you guys don't, so. Anyway, so what I do is I start off with a very light coat as the guide coat. It makes when you spray everything, it allows everything just to lightly sit on top of the motor and just give it a little bit of some area for the second coat, which is much heavier, to tack up to. So you just give it a very light coat. Try to get all the angles. I mean, if you want, you can start with the hotter spots, the bottoms and in the crevices where the areas are going to be a little bit trickier to actually get the paint in. And this is all we do initially to start off with. We just give it a very light coat. This will help anything from having, this helps a lot in the long run of having fish eyes mostly. I mean, it's obviously you're not to the point where anything's going to run or you're going to have any issues along those lines, but this will help with the fish eyes and so on. This will lightly dry, and then when you spray your heavier coat, it's actually sticking to the paint and not the bare metal. So a lot of people get right to it. I watch a lot of videos and see people, honestly, that kind of really don't know how to spray paint. I've been doing this for years, and it's like anybody else. If I can do it, you can do it. I started off not knowing anything in my lifetime about how to do any of this stuff, and I just played with it and played with it. I came from, we weren't broke, but we didn't have, you know, my father bought us some dirt bikes and so on and whatever else, but like he more or less said, here's your first dirt bike, you're on your own from here. So, as obviously every other little kid and everything, you just want to keep upgrading to something better and newer and faster. And so I would start horse trading and changing things around and so on. And that's how we, you know, learn how to do things like this. So you just give it a mist coat all the way around, a guide coat, a mist coat, a light coat, whatever you want to call it. And what you're doing is you're just giving this motor enough light coat around it for the paint to stick to it. So when you put a heavy coat of paint on, it's not going to stick directly to the motor and you have to worry about it. This paint's already adhesed to it a little bit, it's already kind of dried up, and now the paint is going to stick to the paint. So if you keep coming up in nice layers with guide coats, you're not going to have fish eyes. It's basically keeping you from having fish eyes. You're not at any stage where you're going to have runs or anything along those lines. You're only trying to get it lightly coated so the next coat will stick to it even better. Okay, so you can see now the motor is just lightly coated with paint. You see a little bit of gloss there, but obviously you can see all the bare aluminum as well. You are just going around the motor and lightly giving it a coat, so it should look like this. Now it's important to let the motor dry. 15 minutes in between coats, 10, 15 minutes, depending on the temperature outside. And this will be totally dried up, but still tacky enough for a decent coat. Cool nights, about 54 degrees outside. We let about 15 minutes for this to dry up a little bit, to tack up. Always continuously keep shaking your can through the whole process. You don't want to let it sit and reshake it. It's just easier to keep the paint mixed up inside the can at all times, the even coat. And now we are ready to start putting on a thicker coat. So here we go. We are going to start laying it on a little bit thicker than we did our guide coat. Again, you could start in any areas that you think are going to be problematic or harder to get at, harder to coat, inside the cracks and, you know, around the inside areas of the cylinder and so on. And you can get that basically a wet coat, a little bit heavier than the guide coat that you put on there to begin with. And then when you got those areas that are a little tougher to get to, start coming back to your flat areas, your easier coverage areas, and just start. Don't go crazy. Make sure you get inside all the areas. Don't go crazy, but just put on a thicker coat than what you did the first time. So you're not putting a guide coat on here, you're putting a decently thick coat on here. It's still a light coat, but it's much thicker than what we started with. The key to this would be a bunch of light coats. One, you don't really want your paint to be too thick. That's one thing you don't really want, because when the thicker your paint is, the more of a chance it has to chip. I don't know if some of you guys don't know that. So you want to keep the paint as thin as possible, but you want the most coverage that you can get out of it so it looks nice. And obviously an even coat. You want it to look, you know, shiny all the way across. You don't want dry spots throughout it. And then you can see how long this is taking me. That's about half of the motor already. Just got to make sure you're getting all the little dimples. Well, here we come across the top of the cylinder. Coming down. You don't have to do what I'm doing exactly. I'm just showing you how we do it. So this can help you out in your build. So we're going to do the entire bottom of this motor right now. And you're going to see how long this takes me. This should show you. So that's 3/4 of the bottom of the motor. Now we'll do the back of the motor from this side. That should show you how long you're putting the paint on for. That's it. That's the entire bottom of the motor. Now you can go around, hit any spots you see that you may have missed, and there's always going to be in and out, so just because I shot it this way doesn't mean I don't have to come back this way and get the back side of it. There's going to be a bunch of this going around, and this is exactly why we're doing lighter coats. If you can hear the way I'm spraying this can, I'm hitting the spray here a little bit before the motor, and I'm spraying past the motor, and I'm letting off over here. So I'm pulling my finger down here, spraying right across, and letting off over here. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, and this will give me light coats going across and no real runs. So I'm going to pull you back off the stand. I'm going to walk you around. This is coat number 1, and we're going to see what this motor looks like. You're going to keep doing these coats, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 coats, whatever you want to do until you got even coverage all the way around, and then you give it one last coat to give it one clean gloss. So let's pull you off the stand, take a look at you. Okay, so this is after the first light coat all the way around. This is the very first actual coat of paint. So it's not a guide coat, this is the actual. It's still light in small areas, you know, some areas like around the backside, underneath, and as you go around, you'll see like around the insides of the bolt holes on the head, things like that. You know, on this motor alone, up here underneath the exhaust port, you got to kind of go down, spray up. You'll notice that some of these spots are a little bit lighter than others, and you will just get that on your next coat. And I'll show you the bottom of the motor. And the lighting's not the greatest for the showing you the bottom of the motor, but you can see how shiny and clear and smooth, no overspray. And the point of this over and over, and I keep saying it, and I realize this, the point over of doing light coats, multiple light coats, you don't really want to do heavy coats. If you do heavy coats, you won't get into the little areas that are light here. You'll have too much buildup paint in different areas. You can create runs because there's a bunch of areas you could, with a little bit too much paint, you could have a run pretty much anywhere on this motor. There's so many different angles and crevices and bolt holes and nooks and crannies. I mean, you can get runs anywhere. So now she's looking pretty good. Let's get on to coat number 2. Shaking your can all the time. Now we're on to coat number 2, heavier coat number 2. So that other coat was a pretty in between light and an average coat. It was a little on the lighter side than an average coat of paint, and now we're going to do it again. We don't go on and put heavy coats, one heavy coat at any given time. We don't do that ever. Constantly go around it and keep giving it light coats, because if you missed something up in a nook and a cranny and so on your next light coat, you'll see it and you'll get that. And then on your third light coat, you'll make sure that you missed all that in. And then you give it like, basically it's 4th coat. I mean, you could do it with 3, whatever you feel comfortable with. On our 4th coat, that's what we do, 4 coats. On our 4th coat is when we give the motor a quick once over so everything blends together. So we're on coat number 2. We're gonna start coming across again with a medium coat, nothing crazy. Just looking really well now to make sure that we have all our nooks and crannies with paint in them. All our in-betweens, where our cases come together, where the back sides of holes and bolts and the bottom sides of the port and, you know, around the hose areas. You gotta spray up to the head. You know, you just make sure you get all those areas with another light coat. I can't stress that enough to you guys. Don't go crazy trying to kill this thing with paint right off the rip. If you got any spots that are light, you will end up seeing everything where you went too thick. I'm just going fast across it and light just to get my second heavy coat on there. Okay guys, now we're on to our third coat. Let's give it a quick once over with the third coat. Okay guys, now we're on to our fourth coat. We are shaking our can. We're going to give it a thicker final last coat once over the motor, fast all the way around with nice coverage. So we are going to get this right through. We're going to fast forward it for you, and then we are going to show you what we have when we are done. And there you have it, chicken nuggets. This is the final outcome of a $6.99 spray can. This is paint out of a can, obviously, and it looks factory finish. If I can do it, you guys can do it as well. Look at, you can see me in the actual shine of the motor. This is as good of a factory, if not show quality paint job. If you're restoring it or whatever you're trying to do, get it back to the way it's supposed to look, you can see how nice everything looks. Now on some motors, if you wanted to, and some don't, this is a solid black motor and it doesn't matter, but at this point, once it's completely dry, we would remove each individual nut off the head and put brand new nuts all back on the heads, and we put nuts and bolts in the intake and so on. This motor is actually completely black, so we're not going to do that on any of this. But we would pull out each individual one of these bolts on the side cover and replace them with brand new bolts like we do on our other motors. And you can see that in other videos as well. But with an all black motor, this one is finished. It all comes down to the prep. So if you want to sand and sandblast your motor, this is how nice the stuff will come out. And even if you know, you don't have a sandblast cabinet or something, you can get a cheap one at Harbor Freight and so on. I mean, it takes a little bit longer than what we use, but obviously it'll work. But if you want something this nice, it might be worth sending out and having a company sandblast it. I mean, these are the end results of an absolute beautiful job. So guys, there you have it. We walked you through the entire procedure of how we paint our motors, how we get them back into show quality on our restores and whatever else we're doing at the time. And you can do the same thing too. Just follow the steps we showed you, and that's it. You guys can do this. Don't underestimate yourself. You can do it. Look how nice this thing came out. You guys, your motor can be just as nice. Guys, like and subscribe. We're trying to grow the channel. We have a bunch of how to do it videos and so on. McNastyCustomz.com, McNasty Customz on Facebook and Instagram. Guys, thanks for watching, and until the next one, chicken nuggets, I'm out of here.